And we're live.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the next session of Hershey Area All Things Diversity. I'm Susan Court, Dairy Township Supervisor and a proud member of our committee, joined tonight by Amy Ziegler from the Hershey Story Museum and also 3 local veterans. First of all, before we get started, I just wanted to say Happy Veterans Day to all. Thank you today and every day to the men and women who've served our great nation. We appreciate your service above self and your commitment to helping all of us keep our freedoms protected. We're very excited this afternoon or this evening to be learning a little bit about how we can, as a community, create a more welcoming community for our veterans. And we're going to be talking to 3 local vets to learn more about that. But first, I just wanted to quickly let you know that the educational sessions put on by Hershey Area All Things Diversity are organized by Dairy Township, the Downtown Hershey Association, Penn State Health, the Hershey Company, Hershey Entertainment and Resorts, Milton Hershey School, Dairy Township School District, and the Hershey Trust. For those of you who don't know, you can follow Hershey Area All Things Diversity on Facebook. And if you're looking for a list of our past sessions and would like to read some articles, you may do that on the Dairy Township website by just searching under Hershey Area All Things Diversity. And because of the pandemic, we have turned to doing our sessions virtually, which means that we do have a number of these available that are recorded on the Dairy Township YouTube page. So we invite you to check out those past sessions as well. We also wanted to let you know that we have 2 sessions coming up early in 2021 that we're excited to share with you. One is on January 13th, and that's going to be discussing religious inclusion in our community. And then on March 24th, we're going to be talking about trans inclusion in the community. And all sessions, again, will be live streamed on the Dairy Township YouTube page at 7 o'clock. Now, for those of you who are watching the live stream right now, we want to let you know that we very much want you to be a part of this evening's session. So if you have questions or comments throughout the session, please feel free to put them in the chat on YouTube, and we'll do our best to get to your questions before our session is over tonight around 8 o'clock. Now I'd like to turn things over to Amy, who is going to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Susan. I'd like to start off by saying thank you to all of our speakers for participating. Thank you for your service, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you tonight. We are going to be hearing from Thomas Fosnacht, Colonel, U.S. Army retired. He served for a total of 36 years in both active and reserve service. He conducted clandestine collection operations in Frankfurt, Hamburg, Berlin, and Vienna during the Cold War. Following the end of the Cold War, he was assigned to the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff element at NATO headquarters in Brussels until 1995. He also served as a U.S. Liaison Officer with the German Ministry of Defense and US Liaison Mission to the German Army. And Tom, you want to wave your hand so people know who you are?
I am.
Timothy Roach enlisted into the U.S. Army Reserves in 1989 at age 17. He deployed to Operation Desert Storm in 1991 as a combat medic with the 402nd MP Enemy Prisoner of War Battalion. He was commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant in the military police branch in 1994 and entered active duty. Following training at Fort McClellan and U.S. Army Airborne School at Fort Benning, he was deployed to the Republic of Korea. He has also served as Company Executive Officer, Special Reaction Team Commander, and Deputy Provost Marshal at various installations. And Officer Roach is currently a lieutenant with the Dairy Township Police Department. And finally, Jan Yupkavich of Hershey served in the U.S. Army in Vietnam from October 1967 to December 1968 in the 1st Infantry Division as a mortar platoon sergeant. Mr. Yupkavich received the Vietnam Service Award, Combat Infantryman Badge, Vietnam Campaign Medal, Army Commendation Medal, Vietnam Unit Citation, and Standard National Defense Service Medal. He served Vietnam veterans his entire career, helping them find employment and counseling those suffering from PTSD and other issues, working most of his career for the Federal Veterans Administration. And I think that we are going to start out with just a general question to all of you. We can start off with Tim. Tell us a little bit about your service to our country.
So I, as you had mentioned earlier, I enlisted at age 17. My intent after high school was to attend college. My family situation at the time, the burden was on my brothers and sisters that if they were going to go to college to pay themselves. So, that was expected. And back in that day, the late 80s, early 90s, it was kind of affordable as long as you had a job. But certainly I didn't have that kind of money. So I made the decision. I've always had an affinity for the military growing up, playing soldier when I was a little kid and watching war movies growing up. And then, of course, a lot of my neighbors back in Scranton, where I was born and raised, a lot of those folks back there they were World War II veterans. And I've grown to have a tremendous affinity for their service. And I think over time, I just grew into wanting to join the military. So at age 17, both my parents, with their help of their signatures, I was able to enlist in the United States Army Reserves, went to basic training, and following basic training, I went to combat medic school in San Antonio, Texas. And I think in the reserves, which customarily is usually a weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer, I think most of my reserve career was spent on active duty, because shortly after my training at Fort Sam Houston, I did deploy to Operation Desert Storm, where I served as a combat medic. And basically my mission in Desert Storm not only was to care for the soldiers of the United States Army, but quickly thrust into caring for the tens of thousands of Iraqi prisoners of war that were captured. So I was kind of blessed by fire, and to some respects, I'm very fortunate for that. A lot of folks don't have that experience. So I was very fortunate with many other men and women who got to deploy to Desert Storm. So I didn't have enough of the Army, so I decided to come back to college, and I was awarded an ROTC scholarship and attended the University of Scranton, where I received degrees in both criminal justice and international studies. And following my educational career, I was commissioned a second lieutenant. I returned to active duty service, training as a military police officer, deployed over to the Republic of Korea, and I served as a platoon leader in Korea with 35 of the most phenomenal soldiers I've ever met, and had a great mission and great time in Korea. Redeployed back to the United States, and I served in various assignments in the Washington, D.C. area, mostly as an executive officer at the company level. I was also a special reaction team, or essentially from a civilian perspective, a SWAT team commander. So I was trained in that, and I led a military special reaction team in the military district of Washington, in Maryland, and certain parts of Pennsylvania. And then finally, I was named as Deputy Provost Marshal, which essentially, for all intents and purposes, is a Deputy Police Chief of military installations in Washington, D.C. And ironically, 20 some years after I've gotten out of the Army, I'm doing the same position here in Derry Township. So that's the extent of my military career.
Great, thank you so much. Tom, do you want to give us a little bit of background on your career?
Sure. I should start off by saying I'm a Hershey native, graduate 1966. My career, though, however, is not one of a typical Army officer. I was commissioned by Penn State's ROTC program in 1970, actually back at the Indiantown Gap. And while in the pipeline for Vietnam at the infantry school in Fort Benning, I was recruited by the military intelligence branch for a special assignment in Europe, where they could use my German language ability, noting that I was of Pennsylvania Dutch heritage and had studied at the University of Cologne. The major, who later became a major general and commander of the Army's Intelligence and Security Command, told me that they needed someone versed not just in the language, but understood the history, culture, economy, and politics as well, plus could write well. He had read a copy of a paper I had done for Penn State ROTC class on North Vietnam's use of guerrilla warfare to conduct their People's War of Liberation. I thought I was being recruited for attaché duty, even after he explained the assignment was classified, and I would be contacted by a special officer who would give me further details. However, in the meantime, I was not to say anything about this conversation. Thus, I was recruited into the world of clandestine special operations, euphemistically called back then area studies. The training was quite challenging. We started with about 25 trainees from all services, but around a quarter of them dropped out before the first class even started, when we were asked to sign a secrecy agreement and acknowledge that we would be operating out of uniform and without the official recognition of the U.S. government. The whole time we were in the 6-month course, we had to live our cover stories, and the instructors were always trying to trip us up. The hardest part was the POW exercise, in which they tried to break your cover. We were subjected to 5 days of every conceivable type of enhanced interrogation: waterboarding, tiger cage, snake pit, sleep deprivation, diet of moldy bread and bug-infested water, and stress positions. These techniques were the ones used in our POWs by North Vietnamese and North Korean captors. Believe me, you will break and talk under these conditions or die in the process. You come out of the course honed in what is called the art of espionage tradecraft, and we were sensitized to the importance of mastering the smallest of details. I spent over 15 years in Germany fighting the so-called Cold War, which we did win. It's been 30 years since the wall came down, and just about every month I discover another book has come out about the special operations we conducted. Berlin, where I spent 4 years, was a great place to operate. I like to say that we knew where the back door to the Berlin Wall was. You see, the wall ran only around the 3 Allied western sectors in the West. There was no wall or control points between East Berlin and East Germany. Thus, we could sneak into the permanent restricted areas in East Germany, where the Soviet forces stationed their biological and chemical weapons, something we feared more than their nukes. Also, members of the Warsaw Pact could generally travel to East Berlin, where we could hold clandestine meetings or at least retrieve dead drops. During one of my few assignments stateside, I became involved in psychological operations, where we perfected fake news. The 7th PSYOPs Battalion was NATO's strategic PSYOPs unit, and I was in charge of the research and analysis section. You may have heard of the radio stations which broadcast into the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. If the flag had gone up, the 7th would have taken over the operation of these broadcast facilities. This assignment made me into a pseudo-expert on East Germany, and it helped me greatly with my master's thesis at George Washington University, which I was doing at the time. However, when the wall came down in 1989, I was more or less out of a job. But believe me, I and my fellow special operators were never so happy to see the danger of a nuclear war with the Soviet Union dissolve. We had won the Cold War and defeated the communist threat, at least in Europe. Through my membership in the Reserve Officers Association, I had developed some unique relationships, which led to my assignment to the Joint Chiefs of Staff delegation to NATO's political headquarters in Brussels, Belgium. From 1990 to 1995, I was involved in a transformation in NATO, which focused on the absorption of 14 new members from the former Warsaw Pact and eventually conducting its first out-of-area operation in the Balkans. And then my German proficiency popped up again, to provide me with another great assignment in 1996. I was the first US liaison officer sent to the German Ministry of Defense. I sat in their National Military Command Center and coordinated combined operations with the Bundeswehr, the German Armed Forces. Thus, I deployed in 1997 downrange to Bosnia with the German forces and helped them organize their first civil affairs unit. The active army eventually promoted a lieutenant colonel fluent in German to full colonel, which ended my recall. However, in 1998, I was recalled again, this time to serve as the chief of the US Liaison Mission to the German Army. I was based in Cologne, perhaps 5 miles from the student dormitory I had lived in while at the University of Cologne some 30 years earlier. It was a great job, which allowed me to travel anywhere within the country to give briefings on how to operate with US units and systems, as well as provide lectures on ongoing transformation of the US Army and our tactical doctrine. I served in that capacity for 5 years, and it might have gone on longer if they had not discovered I had prostate cancer. Thus, my last year of active duty, I was undergoing treatment at Walter Reed Medical Center. They did a great job, and I have been cancer-free since 2004. By the way, my surgeon was the same doctor who operated on General Schwarzkopf and Powell, but even better, he was a graduate of Penn State School of Medicine here in Hershey.
Great, thank you so much. Jan, you want to give us some background on your service?
Okay, thank you very much. First off, I'd like to start off by saying thank you to Susan Court. Susan, you're going to be surprised by this, but when I first started to work at the Vet Center, it was a totally new VA program designed to work with war theater veterans from Vietnam exclusively. And we're based out of Harrisburg. We're really out of the Lebanon VA hospital, but our main office was out of Harrisburg. And we had the responsibility to cover 12 counties: Juniata, Mifflinburg, York, Lancaster, and on 12 counties. So and this is where Susan comes in, we had to explore how we're going to do outreach. And I believe I called the TV station. And a few days later, Susan Court responded. She came to the Vet Center and she interviewed staff and veterans. And for the next few weeks, maybe months, she would do a story. And I believe this contributed to penetrating, to spreading the word for Vietnam veterans that there is a place that you can go to for your emotional issues related to Vietnam. Secondly, your VA medical benefits and things of that nature. So Susan, I just wanted the world to know, thank you for helping us.
Oh, thank you, Jan. That was really nice of you. That was probably back in 1987 or 88 when you and I first met.
Maybe a little earlier, somewhere in there.
Yeah, Tim was still in high school then, and I was a young reporter and anchor. and I remember when we met, and then subsequently, Jan and I stayed in touch all these years. But soon after those stories aired, we determined that the Veterans Association and WHP TV, where I used to work, both had softball teams. So we thought, well, we'll put together a little friendly softball game. And Jan and I were laughing when we talked yesterday because he remembered. I said, do you remember that softball game? And he just went like this because he remembered that I was injured. I was catching, and one of the vets who was really excited tore into home and took me out in the process. So, that was a long time ago, but I still remember that well. So. Well, I'm glad we played a real small part in helping you do all the good work that you've done all these years, Jan.
I think you played a big role in letting the TV station spread it out in our general area of responsibility, and I thank you.
Thank you.
Well, to start off for myself, I was drafted, and actually I was a part of the loop that one of the young ladies worked at the draft center, and apparently, anyway, she knew that I was working and I was out of college and I was at home, and sure enough, like me and many of my friends were all waiting for this letter from Uncle Sam saying, report to duty in Wilkes-Barre. And sure enough, I got my calling May 18th. That's a date I could never forget. That's a part of my life. It's all part of my codes and whatever. But anyway, it was a meaningful part of my life for me, May 18th. And we were up there at a Wilkes-Barre gymnasium, 400 of us that came in from all over central PA, northeastern PA. And I do have to reflect for a moment that Tim and Tom, well, we're all Army veterans. We have that in common. But for Tim, we have two things in common. One is I'm from Minersville, coal mining town. And every Veterans Day, Memorial Day, the whole town converted to honoring and parades. You can go to any American Legion, VFW, and they were free this and free that. But I grew up with that. And they actually had tanks going downtown, trucks loaded with soldiers, flags waving. And somehow that inspires your heart. And it's a good memory. It's a good memory that I have related to my military experience. And secondly, Tim, you and I have something in common. We both went to the University of Scranton.
Yeah.
I got my master's out of there, and great school, great professors. It was a heartwarming experience. I never experienced an educational system like that. Very personal, touching, encouraging, and it became a respectful part of my life. But okay, being drafted and taking the bus up to Wilkes-Barre and Not everybody was happy being drafted. I don't know if you ever heard of yellow soap. Yellow soap was a soap made by many people at home. It was a homemade soap. And you would see guys walking around with tape, and the soap was tight underneath their armpits. And hopefully this would give them a high blood pressure rating, which the doctor would say, okay, you're going home. But anyway, and that night, we spent 3 days there, 2 nights and 3 days. And the first day was sort of basic. You would be the 50th person in line. There was 400 of us, and everybody had to wait in line. So anyway, that's the way that went. The second day, pretty much the same. And then came the third day when you were in the gymnasium, and Sergeant said, all right, everybody, take your clothes off, go down to your underpants. That we did. And of course, the doctor came around, peeked underneath your underpants, and you're okay, you're passed. But in the meantime, out of the 400, I'm going to say maybe 50, 70 didn't make it. They were sent home for whatever reason. And they told us that whoever is in this gymnasium most likely will be approved to be drafted. And you're going to go into the Army, Navy, Marines, but mostly the Army. And minutes later, a Marine detachment came into the gymnasium, and a sergeant in charge of us remaining 350 or so said, okay, I want to introduce you to Sergeant, I don't remember his name, Sergeant Smith. He's going to go through, he needs 50 guys. I want 50 volunteers right now. Well, they got 20 or 30 volunteers. They said, okay, go through that door. And now we needed 25, let's say 25 more. So the Marine sergeant would go up and down these in-betweens and look at your eyeballs, and he would say, you, and you, go through that door. That meant you're in the Marines for 2 years. Well, anyway, he looked at our row next to us, and then he looked at our row. He's looking at all of us up and down. I said, oh no, here we go. And he lifted his arm and said, that row, report to the door. They got their 50 guys, and they left in several buses, and that was the end of that. They all went in the Marines for their 2 years of being drafted. And then they afterwards asked people to go into the Air Force and the Navy, which they easily got volunteers. And the rest of us said, they gave us a sandwich box. And they said, okay, you're getting on a bus at 1 o'clock, and you're going to the train station, and you're going to end up in Fort Jackson, South Carolina tomorrow morning. We did. And then we started our training. No, then they shipped us to Fort Gordon. All this movement. And Fort Gordon was, it was reasonably good. We were there for, I think, I'm going to say 6 months, and training, get up at 4, and you had to run we were running 7 miles in the morning. Maybe that took 20, 30 minutes, but we were young, we were in shape. The average age of the Vietnam veteran was 19 years old. So we're all young, 18 to 20, 21. And we were pretty healthy. So here again, after your basic training, now all the graduates, when you pass your physical and your psychological, and they said, okay, you're going to go to the next stage, the next step. And well, this was interesting. So let's say out of basic training, there's 200 of us. And you see the guys over there, and they're calling out names. And they said, okay, all of you guys are going to be truck drivers. Bunch more names. Okay, all you guys are going to be mechanics. A few more names. You're going to be cooks. And then he looked at the rest of us, maybe 150. And he said, all right, here's what I want you to do. He didn't tell us where we're going, but we knew it. How did we know it? Because there's a tractor trailer over here with stacks of green T-shirts. Nobody in the Army at that time was wearing a white T-shirt unless you were stateside or Germany or Europe. If you got a green T-shirt, you know you're going to Vietnam. Anyway, they shipped us over to down in Fort Polk in Louisiana. I never thought I'd be talking like this. But anyway, they shipped us down. They flew us down to Fort Polk. Fort Polk was a stepping stone to Vietnam. And there we had field training, tunnel training, jungle training, mortar training, firing training. It was the next stage before war. And it was pretty rough. There was no mercy. We had this is funny. We were getting on our buses, and I was a platoon sergeant down there, and me and another guy, we arranged for all these buses to take us from the training center to the airport so we could fly home for our 21 days. And so here we are. Here's these buses, like 6, 7 buses lined up. Everybody's getting on their buses, going to the airport or going somewhere. And and one of the sergeants, the crankiest, angriest, the person you would love to hate, somebody yelled out, "F you." Oh, he said, "Did I hear that?" And he went like this. And somebody said, "Yeah, F you," the second time. Oh no, here we go. And when you're in Fort Polk, and if you sneeze the wrong way, you're going to do 20 push-ups. Well, he unloaded 6, 7 buses. We had an airplane to catch, right? So he unloaded us. Here we are, 150, 180 of us. And all right, give me 20 push-ups. I didn't like the way he did it. Give me 20 more. Nope, didn't like it. Give me 20 more. Okay. Is everybody ready to get on the buses to go to the airport? A few people said, yeah, we're ready. All right, load up. And no thank yous this time, okay? To me, that was funny.
Hey, Jan, I want to make sure you saw that we put some pictures up. These are 2 of the pictures that.
Well, that picture, that's in the middle of my story. That's the most heartwarming picture in my heart. That
it's a great photo.
And Susan, if that's okay.
Say again?
Well, but anyway, then we went to the airport, come home 21 days, and my parents and some high school friends took me to the train station, went to Philadelphia, jumped on an airplane, flew to San Francisco, and they flew me to Vietnam, and that's another story. So we got to Vietnam, and of course, it's the real deal there. And within 2-3 days of getting a physical and sort of determining where you're going, and of course, a lot was determined by your MOS training, and secondly, what was needed in Vietnam at that time. So we were sent to the 4th Infantry going this way. We're at the airport, a big sign, 4th Infantry. About a half hour later, they reloaded us onto trucks. They said, now you're going to the 1st Infantry. And then 3 days later, you find out that, 50 guys were wiped out and we're all replacements. And we were, and that's the way it went. So we ended up in the 1st Infantry, 1st to 16th Alpha Company. And we all heard of Michelin rubber plantation, where the French developed how to make rubber. And actually the rubber plantation was still functioning, still making money. But that's basically where we were. And we were there for about 9 months. And I'll get to this picture now. This is up in Budap. Budap is on a border from maybe 60 miles northwest of Saigon. And we were in the jungle. They didn't give us our mail for 2 weeks, which is unusual. But later on, we found out they didn't give us the mail because they wanted to give us something as a Christmas present, which was good thinking. So this is Christmas Day that you see this picture. I think I'm a full 128 pounds. Of course, you lose weight when you're out in the jungle, stuff like that. You're not eating right. And if you look to my right, you're going to see that's our Christmas tree. We have a aiming stake in the middle, and then we have string, and then we put all of our Christmas cards there and Christmas things that our families sent to us. Very heartwarming. And but the real story behind this is, if you look at my right hand, I have a bottle of what's called Boilo. Boilo is like East European whiskey, homemade. And my Aunt Millie and Uncle Joe, that was his hobby, to make Boilo. And Boilo is a whiskey. You mix it with cinnamon or lemons or orange peelings. And everybody had their own little secret on how to ferment this and make it taste the way he wanted it. But my uncle knew that I liked cinnamon. Of course, he sent us a half a gallon jug. And I opened up the shoebox in Vietnam. And I said, oh my God, what is this? Of course, whiskey is not allowed out in the field. So what we did, of course, you shared everything. And of course, you would take a swig and, hey, Bob, you want to try this? What is it? Just try it. Anyway, that traveled around our circular NDP on the border. And about a half hour later, a captain comes down and says, all right, who owns this? Oh, I don't know. Nobody want to own up because we don't want to get in trouble. So somebody said, hey, it's Yup Cabbage over there. And I hear this, Yup Cabbage over here, come here. And a sergeant or the captain said, all right, now, where's the rest of this whiskey? I said, sir, that's the end of it. We all had a swig, we passed it around and it went up, and I don't know how it got to you. And he put his mouth in my face and said, bullshit. He said, this is the best whiskey my colonel ever had. I want more of it. I said, sir, there is no more. There's only one, and you had the empty. And he said the colonel had the last swig, and he said, wow, what was that? So anyway, that was a funny story. It's a heartwarming story. It livened our spirits. And anyway, that was a good experience there. And about an hour later, up in this Budap area near a village, is on the side of a mountain. We all went up, 50 of us at a time, went up and took a bath. And then we prepared the next morning to get out. And we had a tank with our unit. Sometimes a tank would be connected to our units. And so there were about 8 of us left in the mortar platoon. All the other guys left on the Hueys, and they were being transported out. And so we were curious, wait a minute, there's a tank here, there's 8 of us, and in comes a 4-engine prop. And the airport is about the length of 3 football fields on the side of a mountain. At the end of the mountain was a village. And we said, well, what are we going to do? And of course, the plane lands, does its thing. Here, the tank immediately gets on the plane. We have 5 minutes to load up, got to get out of there because it's a hot enemy territory. And well, anyway, we got on the plane. Did anybody ever fly in an airplane with a tank inside? Anyway, oh no, oh my God, we're not going to take off. And the airport was small and short. So the pilot was revving the engine, and you could feel the plane jerking along. Finally popped the clutch and off we go. And as we got to the end of the airport, we dropped down about 50 feet. I said, this is it. Anyway, we pulled out, surged ahead. We flew about 50 feet off the ground for about 2-3 miles. We landed at another airport somewhere. And then we all said, well, we may land, but how are they going to stop this thing? But anyway, that was a funny story in retrospect. So that was part of our early Vietnam experience. And of course, the next issue is in January was the Tet Offensive. And the Tet Offensive really crept up on us. But we were about 40 miles northwest of Saigon. Our basic Michelin rubber plantation, Light K was the name of the town we were in, and little village. So we were getting word that Saigon is in trouble down there, and Da Nang was in trouble, and several other places. Well, a couple of days later, we got on the fleet of our Hueys, and they took about 80, 90 of us. No, I think it was about 70 of us down to Saigon to the racetrack. And that's where we landed. There's a cemetery nearby. So we landed in the afternoon, and we set up that night in our usual night defensive position, NDP. And we got in our circle. And of course, when you make your circle, then at night you put 3 men out, north part to south part, east and west. And around midnight at this cemetery, the listening post blew an ambush, and they killed 6 Chinese women that had about 200-pound medical knapsacks. And these were larger women, strong, very brave. They had no weapons. And so, okay, that was considered, well, we killed some of the enemy, and it was all medicine. So anyway, we got up around 5 that morning. It was still dark. We're getting ready to go into Saigon, and to go in 2 files. That's where the Army operated in the jungle, was 2 files, and you were 6 steps apart, very much like today's virus. You're 6 steps apart. So we're leaving our NDP, night defensive position, and the enemy caught us in a crossfire machine gun ambush. Maybe, I'm going to say 7 o'clock in the morning, somewhere, just getting daylight. And I would say within minutes, we had very little counteraction because it happened so fast. The enemy were on both sides, and they had machine guns, and they were quite sophisticated, and they ruthlessly killed so many. I think over 40 were killed or wounded, and I was one of 14 survivors. I didn't get wounded. We were at the tail end, and the enemy would always let you pass, but the enemy would always shoot in the middle and then aim to the front, because the rear, by the time you think of things, the enemy already wiped out those in front. So here we're down to 14 people and 14 troops. That was pretty sad. I mean, miserable, come to think of it. And I met a veteran later on, maybe 20 years later, at the Vietnam Veterans War Memorial, and we sat down and talked at length about that incident. And he was a survivor, but he had several wounds. He was sent home because of his wounds, because of that incident. And the bravery involved is just incredible. So anyway, then life went on. We were assigned to an artillery unit. We were guards. And then it took us about a month or 6 weeks to develop a new company again. But we were back to our 70 infantry. In Vietnam, everything was small scale. Stateside, you had 200 infantry. Vietnam, you had 60, 70. So anyway, a month or 2 later, we were out back in the field, doing our thing, ambush at night. I learned this saying: when you hear a creak in the floor at your house at 3 o'clock in the morning, you don't think much of it. But when you're out in the jungle with 6 guys in the middle of nowhere, and you hear a creak in the jungle, then this instills a concern. Uh-oh, that wasn't exactly a bear stepping on a twig. You knew the enemy knew that they knew where you were, and you knew that they were looking for you. So anyway, and that's the beginning of post-traumatic stress, the event. Post-traumatic stress, I'll slip into that a little bit. It grows on you. It's something that you hear. In this case, it was hearing that twig break, and that when you're also when you're at the age of 18, when you're 18 to 24, your brain is learning, you're developing, you're making choices, you're experimenting, you're going down different roads in life. But in Vietnam, you were faced with living or dying. There were no choices. You didn't go into a 7-Eleven store. Let's say you could have a Pepsi, a 7-Up, a Coke, or whatever, an iced tea. There were no choices. In Vietnam, you had no choices. And that's the beginning of your post-traumatic stress. Every day we're faced with it. It could be walking near a village. A week or two before I came home, I'm walking through a village, and I didn't want to step on a landmine, and I didn't want the guy in front of me to step on a landmine, and I practiced safe distancing. But it was a thick jungle. I'm jumping around here a little bit, and I'm spreading the vines. And that's another saying in Vietnam is you're walking through the jungle, and the guy behind you catches up, and you're saying, he'll say, well, what's going on? And then you'll say, well, wait a minute, I hit a wait a minute vine. Because when a vine catches your knapsack or your weapon and it pulls you back, you immediately say, hey, wait a minute, right? So that's a wait a minute vine. Well, anyway, I'm outside this village, a couple of weeks to go for me to go home. And by then you're really cautious what you eat, where you sleep, what you drink. Anyway, I had dysentery for 6 weeks. But anyway, here we are. And I'm pushing the vines aside, and I'm pushing the vines aside my right hand. And my right hand touches the head of an elderly lady sitting on an outdoor commode outside this village. And I was shocked because my hand, now, how could you make this up? How could you touch an old lady's head? And of course, I leaned in, and she closed her eyes, and she had a scarf on, as most did at that time. And I apologized. I said, I'm sorry. And I moved on. But anyway, these are these little experiences. So anyway, going through after the Tet Offensive and going through this continuous ambushes at night, instant fire missions. Sometimes you'd be carrying 3 12-pound rounds on your back and your food. So you had a good 80 pounds on your back most times. And but I don't know, somehow we never complained. And that was life in the jungle.
Jan, thank you for sharing all this. I want to take a break for a second because I want to bring Tim and Tom back into the conversation and come back to some of the things that you touched on, because all three of you have given such an interesting perspective into a little bit about what your service was like. And I think that's how communities in general are challenged, because for those of us who didn't have an opportunity to serve, we can't even imagine what it was like. So this helps our community right here just understand a little bit about your service. But we want to talk about some of the ill effects of service many years later. You mentioned PTSD, but we also want to talk about your time coming home for all three of you, what your communities did or didn't do, and what you would suggest for today's communities to welcome veterans, because most of us don't know what to say other than thank you. So Tom, let's start with you and then head to Tim and then to Jan on that.
Well, my send-off was as bad as my return. Penn State had to shut down this past spring, because of COVID. That was not the first time the university shut down. I lost the last 3 weeks of my senior year because the university had decided they would adhere to the call for a national moratorium. All the normal classes of instruction were canceled, and instead we had to attend seminars on the illegality of the war in Southeast Asia, the unconstitutionality of conscription, and various things. And to make matters even worse, we in ROTC were ordered not to wear our uniforms on campus in order to avoid further unrest or incidents which were going on at the time. So when I left Happy Valley, I was not in a very happy attitude. And so I came back on leave. It was October of 1971. And I don't know if you remember, if any of you are old timers in Hershey, Ummy's Bar. You know where Chipotle is today? That was one of the three best watering holes in Pennsylvania. DA's, where Fenici's is, being the other one. And down there where that, what is it, a Rite Aid or whatever, across from that Duck Donuts was Lucy's.
I remember Lucy's, yep.
Lucy's mysteriously burned up. Anyway, that Ummy's Bar, we had been going into that place. And if you went in the back door and nobody was around, Ummy would give you a quart bottle of beer if you're underage. So I went in there. I was in uniform because back then you had to fly in your Class A's. And I went in there. I was waiting for a friend to join me. And the gal was a classmate of mine. She came up to me and she goes, "What are you doing here?" I said, "What do you mean? I'm home on leave." She goes, No. What are you doing here in that uniform?" I said, "Well, I'm in the Army." She goes, "Listen, the owner does not like to have soldiers in here. He's, go home and change before he comes and makes a scene." Now, it wasn't Ummy. By this time, it had been taken over by somebody else. And that was a very nice trip because on the way back, walking through San Francisco airport, I was called a baby killer, and some guy tried to spit on me, but luckily I ducked it. So now it is such a pleasure to see when you go through airports, people offering to buy drinks and lunch, applauding guys and gals in uniform. The country has really turned around, and you cannot imagine, for me, what a great change this is.
Tim, did you see that change? You served later than Jan and Tom. Did you feel more welcome when you returned?
Yeah, absolutely. To some extent, over the years after, we returned in the summer of '91 from Desert Storm. And I think the country at that time was trying to repair, and the community where I, came back to in Scranton, I think everyone was trying to repair the way they treated service members, particularly during the Vietnam era. And, I have to admit, I'm very, very fortunate. I remember when our buses pulled back into our reserve center in Wilkes-Barre, and the police, from the various towns were there. And they gave us all, lights and sirens escorts back to our hometown. And of course, I grew up in Scranton, so it was a sizable town for Pennsylvania, about 100,000 people. And they took us lights and sirens, our families, we were still in our uniform, and they paraded us right through the street that day. There's nothing, and people came out and they were standing on the sidewalk cheering for us. Susan, I was invited to party after party and celebration after celebration. And, 19 years old, I felt great about myself, so proud. And like I said earlier, it wasn't until a few years later, and particularly when these older gentlemen in my neighborhood, these World War II veterans who were at the end of their life, they were members of American Legion and Veterans of Foreign War Post. They would call me. I was down in Washington, D.C., stationed on active duty, and they would call me and say, "Can you come home in your dress uniform and help us on Memorial Day? Can you help us with Veterans Day ceremonies?" And I did that. I drove up from Washington, D.C. I wore my formal dress blues. And, I always disregarded these gentlemen in my neighborhood growing up. And then when I was a young lieutenant and I came back and I started to ask them what they did, some of these guys were in the Battle of the Bulge, the 28th Infantry Division. Some of these guys landed in D-Day. I was most astonished at my neighbor. He worked in a factory his whole life. He's very unassuming, a gentleman. Him and his wife were great people. But, I came up from Washington, D.C. to help him out with a Memorial Day service one day, and I asked him. And he was a Polish fellow, and he had a nickname by Saxy. He liked playing the saxophone, so they called him Saxy. And I asked him, I said, "Sax, would you mind telling me what you did in World War II?" And he told me he was a landing craft operator in the Pacific. and that's all I needed to hear. I knew the carnage that he saw, and I'm digressing here, but my point is, people showered me with kindness when I came back in 1991. And I felt guilty over the years after that, because I obviously, as you hear from Tom and Jan, that they didn't have that kindness shown to them for their service. And the World War II, in the same respect, I don't think people deliberately disregarded the service of our greatest generation, but a lot of those gentlemen didn't come home to the fanfare that we see today. And as Tom said, with people cheering on the soldiers in airports and being kind to them, I'm so glad and so happy that, the last couple decades, our society has turned and recognizes the soldiers today, especially the hardships they're facing in Afghanistan and over in Southeast Asia. To know that these folks, these young men and women, come home and they are regarded, because I couldn't imagine what Tom and John, what they went through in the Vietnam era. I was on the complete opposite of what they experienced, and I was very fortunate.
And the thing is, a lot of us, like Jan, were draftees. So, we had been required to go, and our own countrymen were, the protests were focused wrong. They should have gone after the policymakers. Instead, they went after the Army and the Navy, Air Force, and Marines, because we were the ones fighting. We can't stop the war.
Jan, what was your homecoming like?
In retrospect, I'm going to say it was sad towards okay. There was no such thing as a welcoming other than your family. Funny thing is, if I could digress for a minute, I called my parents when I landed in Philadelphia. I called my parents. I said, no, wrong. I landed in Philadelphia in an airplane about 11 o'clock at night, walking down the street, and the police took me to a free overnight sleeping where the homeless went. So the next morning I got on a plane, and finally I got to Philadelphia, took a train to Reading, and then I'm coming into Pottsville, and it was a horizontal snow. I mean, the wind was blowing, the snow was blowing. I called my parents and I said, hey, okay, I'm in Philadelphia. I'll be home tomorrow. But I was in Pottsville, miles away. Anyway, I called my friend. My friend picked me up and took me to my house. I knocked on the door. Here I am, knocked on the door, and my sister, Janine, answered the door. She screamed. And then, of course, my mom came out, my dad. Anyway, I surprised them. I didn't want it to be sad. I just wanted to be a jokester, sort of, a little bit of jokester in me. And, but anyway, 10 years later, 15 years later, my mom told me that it was sad. She said, you look sick. I said, Mom, I weighed 128 pounds. And she said, you look sick. And she said, if I would have been near President Johnson, she said, if I couldn't slap him. And my mom never said a curse in her life, prayed every night. She said, if I was near President Johnson and if I couldn't slap him, I'd spit on him. And I said, Mom, that was the era. But it was there was no homecoming. It was quietness. They told you at the airport, get into civilian clothes, and went to San Francisco airport. San Francisco, you have all your hippies. And at the airport, there was a chain of hippies snaking their way through us veterans who were at the airport, and you'd get a 50% rate. And at that time, that's what veterans paid. You paid half price. And they were snaking in between us, which I thought that was, I didn't see an American woman in 13 months. And I have my peers were dancing and handing us flowers. And I just thought that moment was okay. But coming home, next 10 years after you're home, it was silence. And that was I went to the civil service and the lady said, put down you're a veteran, but do not put down you are a Vietnam veteran. Things like that. And I know that we all survived, we endured, but those were the times. The war was very disruptive in our American society, maybe even a little similar to what we're going through now. But we all survived. It was tough, but we survived. Wasn't easy. I wouldn't do it again. I would welcome any veteran coming home. And if I could go on for another minute, and in my whole life experience, my 28 years at the Vet Center, my year in Vietnam, and over the years, what evolved my thinking about this, you know, it was pretty tough because McNamara, he was instrumental in all of this development of the war. You know, 58,000 people dying, 10,000 women served in Vietnam. I have nursing stories. But anyway, but what I learned was, McNamara also was instrumental in lowering the IQ. And I was in Vietnam and we had guys with low IQs who couldn't function. I mean, how did this happen? But anyway, there were like 300,000 low IQ in Vietnam, and they ended up being dishwashers. But anyway, McNamara went on to, he wrote a book, and I saw him on TV being interviewed. And in the middle of the interview, he covered his head and he cried for 5 minutes. But anyway, so it was a difficult time for everybody. It wasn't a war against a culture. It was communism versus democracy, and we were a part of it. I still have friends that say we did the right thing by going there. And you do have to respect. But anyway, what I want to get to is what I've learned over the years. This will only take a minute, I hope. I never realized I'd be talking this much, Susan. I'm not a talker. In fact, I was going to call you back and say, hey, look, I can't do this. Anyway, give me 2 more minutes. What I noticed was, and this is my conviction, is that we had the people who experienced a war or the intensity of being in the service, there's this term I call dedication. Their dedication is to the flag and what the flag represents. It represents our country, the best country on earth, the best country ever. And that's what we fought for, the dedication to the flag. And that's what united us, that dedication. Secondly, commitment to our fellow soldiers, commitment to our companions, commitment to our helping one another. I never heard of a medevac helicopter saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't make it. It's too tough, too difficult." Never. They landed. I saw them coming down the trees, taking 5 minutes to come down on a vertical drop, because if they would hit a tree, they would have crashed. On and on. And I know a nurse from Harrisburg, and she told me she worked 28 hours straight. And then I know a doctor. He worked 32 hours straight. And he ended up in 100 feet from the hospital after working straight 32 hours. And they were slapping him, and he's carrying on. And he finally said, "Why are you hitting me? What am I doing here? Why are you doing this?" He lost his consciousness in that 32 hours of surgery. And that's the word commitment. And that's what these people did. My high school classmate jumped in a river, rescued his companion. And as he was pulling him out, he got shot. And in the meantime, as he was crawling out, another guy got shot by a sniper. He fell in, and my high school classmate went into the river the second time to pull out this other wounded guy. And of course, you know, you can't swim in the river in Vietnam because you're carrying 60, 80 pounds on your back. You're done. But he did that. That's a commitment. Being wounded, that is a commitment to your fellow, your companion, to the nurses, to the pilots, and universally in a war zone, you're connected. And thirdly, finally, sacrifice. by the term sacrifice, I mean where you would sacrifice your life, where you're going into a combat zone, snipers are shooting everyone, but you're still proceeding to rescue your fellow soldier. And that's called sacrifice. You know you're going to get hurt. You think you're going to get hurt. Chances are you're going to get hurt. If not killed, and 58,000 died in Vietnam. If you're not going to get killed, you're going to get wounded. And over 350,000 were crippled because of the type of war, guerrilla warfare. And that's the sacrifice, the term sacrifice. And that's what people did. They sacrificed. And we all had the belief that America is the land that we love. And we put our hands over our hearts and we say together, thank you, America.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And there is no doubt of all of your commitments and your sacrifices that you've met. And I have to tell you, I'm sure Amy and all the people watching this feel the same way, but I've been tearing up off and on listening to your stories. And Tim, you made me cry at the Memorial Day ceremony a year ago, and you made me cry again tonight, because the commitment that all three of you have to our country is so commendable. And the heartbreak that I think all of us feel as a community that some of you didn't have the homecoming you wanted is heart-wrenching. But the inspirational thing, I think, is what you mentioned, Tim, that you said when you came home, you felt you had a different experience. So I want to ask you, do you think that today and moving forward, that is how our community is treating veterans? And what advice would you give to community members who don't have vets in their family to better understand so that everyone, when they do come home, they get the kind of welcome that you had, Tim?
Yeah, undoubtedly, we as a country, we have made the right turn, and you see it all the time. These businesses offer veterans, reductions in costs and some services and some discounts. And I think that's the right thing to do because, these young men and women, they leave the comforts of home. And I think, whether they go to a combat zone or they just go overseas on a deployment, the bottom line is they gave everything up that they had. The comforts of getting up and going to a refrigerator when you're hungry or thirsty, the comforts of when you're bored to turn on a TV, the comforts of when you're tired to take a nap. You abandon all of that when you enter the service. And of course, to extend a little bit further, when you go to a combat zone, you lose so many of those amenities that you've grown up with. And so it's very important, I think, as a country, we recognize what these people, we say the word sacrifice. And I think it's very important for everyone to realize what they sacrifice. Ultimately, people, they lost their lives. Obviously, people have been injured and disabled, but the sacrifice of leaving the comforts of home, leaving your family, leaving your friends, leaving your community, and going elsewhere where you don't know people. It's very important to recognize that. So the country's doing a phenomenal job. I have a colleague that's from a European nation, Western European, very modern country. And I asked him once, I said, does your country honor veterans like we do here in the United States? And he said, absolutely not. And I was, they're an ally of the United States. I'm not going to mention the country. I don't want to disparage anyone from that area or region, but I was shocked that they don't recognize, they don't have these parades, they don't have Memorial Day, they don't have Veterans Day, they don't recognize. So we're doing a phenomenal job in this country. I think we've come a long way from the 1970s. We've come a long way from Tom and Jan's service years. And, I can't thank the society enough. The second part of your question was, what do we do for veterans now? What do we say? And thank you is that's the most important thing. But when you say it, you have to say it from the heart and understand what they went through, because it's easy to say thank you. We have little children, you teach them to say thank you. Do they really know what that means? But as an adult, when you say thank you to a service member, a serviceman, servicewoman, you have to understand in your heart what they did, to leave their home, to have some challenging training, have fear in their lives. And it's very important to realize that. So we're doing a great job as a society, great job as a community.
Thanks, Tim. So my grandfather was in the 5th Marine Division who landed at Iwo Jima, and it had a profound effect on his life because he struggled with PTSD until he died. And it was, during that time, people didn't talk about PTSD. And so it, was a difficult time for his entire family. And I'm very curious, I'm sure that all of you know people who have struggled with that after returning from combat. And I think one of our goals is always to provide the community with some actionable information that will help them be welcoming to the populations that we're talking to and talking about. And I'm just curious if you have any suggestions for how community members can support people with PTSD better, and how we can be more active within the veteran community just in general.
Tom, is that you?
Any one of you can kick us off. Tom, do you want to start?
Well, if I could, I'd like to maybe turn that question around, because one of the things that you had proposed to us, to think about, and I've given it a lot of thought, is what the community can do for our veterans. Well, you can add to the value of our service and sacrifice by being a true American, by coming together with your fellow Americans to implement the principles we swore an allegiance to in the Constitution, by realizing that an effective democracy requires the willingness and ability to compromise. We must come together as we learn to do in the military, where teamwork is the key to success. This country is unique because of its diversity, but we must remember that we are Americans first, regardless of race, color, creed, religion, or sexual orientation. We accept each other's differences because we believe every American has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There are very few of us remaining from the greatest generation, but as that American generation, which came together as one to conquer what appeared to be an unbeatable alliance of evil in 1941, we are faced now with a viral enemy that is killing thousands of our fellow citizens and threatening to destroy our economy. The only way we will defeat this pandemic is to unite in a common effort and put our faith in science like the nation did in World War II. And please don't forget, wear your mask for a veteran. Thank you.
Tom, so well spoken. And Tim, every word you spoke ought to be a rule of law. And thanks for sharing. You must have been so connected to veterans that were having difficulties. And you're right, Tom. This is this generation's so-called Vietnam War. I mean, virus. We have to work together as Americans under one flag. And this is my common theme: is we've got to work together. And thanks for reminding us that this is an activity that we have to work together to overcome until we have a vaccine, etc. And we have to involve ourselves, the medical profession, individuals, kids, schools, and we have to work together to help these people that are having a hard time. And to answer, is it Tina? Wait, I'm sorry. Amy, was this your question? I say that in life, for all of us, generally in high school, there are two goals. One is to prepare yourself for an emotional balance in life, friendships, helping one another, giving us guidance, maybe having a laugh or two, supporting one another. And then secondly, in high school, we have to learn how to economically provide for ourselves. That could be a trade school, college, it could be a talent, the parental talent. What did your dad teach you? What did you learn in life? So these are two goals: emotional balance and economic skills. So those are the two overriding. And I like with what Tim and Tom said, that I do believe that, and we've learned this, that when you're leaving the military, there should be a pre-military exit program. And I'm sure there is, that go over these things of skills, work skills, emotional. You can't be a traumatic person to your family with PTSD and things of that nature. So I think there should be like a month before you get out of the service, go over some things individually, group wise. Are you prepared physically, economically, emotionally? And I believe the military should be instrumental in supporting this. They should have guys like Tom, Tim, and me. I'd be glad to volunteer. I've volunteered for the last 8 years or so, you know, with here and there with different veterans. And so there has to be something, some guidance, some steps. And this has to be a responsibility, I would say, number one, with the military, number two, with the individual soldier, and number three, the society that we live in. I think we should be a little more tolerant and accepting of a veteran that's coming out of the military, war zone, civilian, stateside duty, because there's a commitment there in a military system. Military system is not civilian. You don't have very much ground to negotiate. In the military, it's vertical, you know, yes, sir, no, sir. And that's it. But anyway, you know, I, as a kid, and I saw my dad pick up the check at a restaurant for a veteran that just came home, and the family was there, and my dad picked up the check. And I'll be damned, I'm doing the same thing all my life. And it's okay, I love it. I paid a check, don't even tell them, just walk out the door. And sometimes they run out to the parking lot and say, you didn't have to do that. I know, but my dad wanted me to do that for you. Anyway, that's the way I explain it. So anyway, and then before the veteran gets out of the military, there should be an explanation of benefits, health benefits, like a Vietnam veteran has at Agent Orange, there's 15 cancers. I have 3 cancers, you know, and somebody has to educate the Vietnam veteran and or any other veteran getting out of the service today. Here's what the VA has for you. There has to be some type of, you know, and a lot of veterans are going to say, yeah, oh, okay. They'll sit in a 2-3 day class. They'll say, yeah, bull. But 5 years later, there's an onset of something that's connected to your military experience. Then you learn. So, and that's how you learn. But anyway, it's still, the military will still put that in your brain and you could access it later on. So I think we could improve helping our veterans. I think we could be a little more concrete in doing some hardcore explanations. Okay, you're getting out of the service in 30 days. Now this is it. You know, how are you ready? Or is your family ready? Are you going to be stressful to your family? And things of that nature. And you know your resources. And the VA is very open, very open. The VA learned a lot in its working with veterans, working with post-war veterans. But anyway, I agree with Tom and Tim. They gave profound examples and I like with what Tim said, that what America could say is, no, walking down the street, thank you, veteran, thank you. Simple as that. Simple as that. It happened to me today twice.
We have a great question from YouTube. So before we wrap up, I wanted to ask that. What is what are some things you miss about being in the service? And conversely, what are some things that you were glad to leave behind? Tim, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, Jen hit the nail on the head before. Particularly when you deploy, when you go overseas, you're in a combat zone. The camaraderie that you establish. I mean, you often hear this. You often hear this statement from veterans is that, you fight for each other, and that is so true. I mean, Jan referenced before the medical staff in Vietnam, how they worked tirelessly, and I experienced the same thing when I was in Desert Storm. There were, in my circumstance, we had about 1,200 military police officers that were guarding prisoners and going to the front line and escorting prisoners. And in total, my particular camp had around between 30 and 40,000 Iraqi prisoners that we guarded and we escorted from the front lines back. And you may find this hard to believe, there are only 7 medics. We had 7 combat medics and a anesthesiologist who was drafted, for lack of better terms, and assigned. He was a physician assigned to our unit. So we had eight persons that were able to care for all of these service members, both enemy and our own service members. And yet we never passed up the opportunity to provide care. We would work a shift all night, 12, 13, 14 hours, go back to our tent, sleep in our bunk, and somebody was banging on the tent saying, listen, I need some help. And we always were so glad to have that camaraderie, that we were there to provide for them. That's what I miss about the military. You got, when you're in a deployment, everyone shares the same, they're all in the same circumstance. They share the same, poor food, the inability to call home, the weather, you don't get a lot of showers. Everyone has that, and they have that camaraderie. So that's what I miss most is that camaraderie. What I don't miss is the constant transfers. I think that's what was the impetus for me to finally get out of the military. I was promoted to captain as an officer, and once again I got more orders to move, and I think I was ready to settle. And everything else about the Army, I miss it tremendously. Here 22 years later, I still miss my service, but I just couldn't take the constant transfers and the orders to move and relocate. So that's what I'm glad I got away from.
Yeah, thanks. Tom, how about you?
Well, I think what it is that camaraderie. It's probably what draws guys like us also to go to American Legions and VFW. The one thing that I miss is the men and women that you serve with. You can depend on them. And the more intense situation, if you're in combat or if you're in very particular situations, and that person's got your back, and you can go off on leave together with them or various functions, and they are more than a sibling, if you can believe that. And that's what I really missed when I left active duty. And in my case, the first part of my career, I was more or less operating as a loner. But when we would come back off of operations and then be able to, decompress and get debriefed and what have you, the people that you were working with understood. And it's something that civilians, because if they're ever put from the moment you go through basic training and into services, you are stressed to meet certain standards and requirements, to challenge yourself. And when you come out and the experience is to make a stronger person of you as an individual. And that is something whenever I would get in my unit civilians that had not been in the military, and they'd screw up and you chew them out, they would fall apart and want to quit. And you could tell that they had never been chewed out by a drill sergeant. because, you know, you chew them out, you make sure that they get points made to them, what they did wrong and everything. You don't humiliate them. But they were never used to having been confronted with their weaknesses and their failings. And but the next day, you treat them as, well, okay, get over it, okay, let's move on, and we'll proceed and get the job done. The higher I got in my career, the less I had to deal with the old hurry up and wait. But that was probably one of the most frustrating things. And to echo what Tim was saying about the transfers, my career was unusual because of my specialty. I had stayed in those areas a lot longer, but I had to. I feel for the other ones because I saw so many of them that as the families, they can't take it. And if you're in certain high tempo units like special forces, like the 82nd Airborne, your Marine Expeditionary Forces, your SEALs, the Navy, a Navy. If you're in the Navy, you can expect to go out to sea 6 to 9 months. And you very quickly find out that spouse has to be married to the service more than the service member. Otherwise, it isn't going to work. And in my career field, the divorce rate was something like 60%. So
you mentioned a good point, Tom, and we did want to get to that tonight, which was just the need to not just support veterans, but support their families, both while people are serving and when they're home. So thank you for bringing that up. Jan, what about you? What would you like to say to that question we got on YouTube tonight about things that you missed from the service?
Okay, if I could just reflect on what Tom mentioned, is to involve the family. That's critical. That's something the VA didn't do until the 70s and 80s. But anyway, that's a critical point, is to involve the family. No one brought it up, but Tom, I'm glad you did. It's a good point. What did I miss about my military experience? I'd say friendship. Different guys get pictures of their sisters, and then they would send pictures of you and your gang doing something in Vietnam, and then your friend would say, "Hey, my sister Donna is interested in. Could you write her a letter?" Yeah, she lives in La Jolla. Okay, no problem. But I kind of miss that. I met several families. I never met them in person, but I met them through the mail. And it was fun. It was nice to get a letter from somebody that you didn't know, but it was inspiring. And it took away the 3 minutes of your life in Vietnam, in the jungle. You say, "Oh my God, look at this. Look at it. Here's a picture of her climbing a tree or playing tennis or whatever." And you'd say, "Hey, Bob, yep, I'm going to La Jolla. Count me in, buddy." And things like that. I miss that. And even little things like I'm wearing this. Vietnam veterans don't wear jewelry. I didn't wear any jewelry in my 50 years home. I never wore a watch, a ring, a neck this, a neck that. But now here's a friendship. A friend of mine gave this to me a few years ago. He had it made up. He has my name on it. And I do wear this on Veterans Day, once a year. And Vietnam veterans don't wear jewelry because in a jungle, you didn't wear a watch. You didn't want to make any noise. You don't want to flash your light, and somehow the habit continued. But anyway, I don't want to be, anyway, but this is a joyful moment for me to get this in the mail from a friend you didn't see in many years. I have a friend in Las Vegas. This morning I got my text, and and I have, and then for the next few years, people said, "Hey, come on out." And I had friends visit me. I had college friends that were in the military, Vietnam. They came home, they visited us in my hometown, and we had a nice time.
Jan,
So,
I don't know if you've probably heard this expression. Tim, I don't know if it still was around when you came in, but remember the term, if the Army wanted you to have a wife, they would have issued you one.
yeah, you're right.
Remember?
You are
Boy,
right.
and they finally woke up and have realized that, you know, if you want high morale, you better make sure everything's content and well back at home. And that when the troops go away, that they have these family support groups, you know,
Yep.
to take care of the kids. And one thing that I don't think the civilian world is that aware of, the Army, the military, has some of the best daycare centers, you know, in the whole society.
Yep.
We're hearing all of you talk about the importance of camaraderie, and certainly you get that even today in staying connected. Some of you belong to the American Legion. Talk a little bit as we wrap up tonight about what we can do as a community to support you in your activities at the Legion. And I understand we can all even get involved too. So I don't know if Tim or Tom or one of you wants to kind of talk about that a little bit. I think the community would enjoy learning more.
Well, Tim's our vice commander at the post, and I think he's better suited to make a recruitment pitch. So go ahead, Tim.
Sure. You know, the misnomer I want to dismiss, because, you know, I had this ideology too, is that, you know, American Legion and veterans of foreign war posts are merely bars. And that is not the case. You know, of course, they do have social clubs in these facilities. But, you know, I was always adverse to joining because I didn't want to join a bar per se. But I did. A friend convinced me several years ago, and you know, I couldn't have been happier, because there's a sense in there with the veterans that belong, that we didn't stop committing our service to the country. These posts, whether it's VFW, whether it's American Legion, what have you, these men and women are still committing. They're doing blood drives. We're doing donations for the Veterans Administration, particularly the men and women who they're housed by the Veterans Administration, whether it's shelters, whether it's nursing care, nursing home facilities. We are still doing drives for them. We're doing clothing drives. We're doing food drives. We're giving back to the community. A lot of places probably don't know that 60% of the proceeds generated from these American Legion posts have to be donated back to the community. And you know, I know personally, the last couple of days, the last couple of weeks, the Hershey American Legion donated to the police department's K-9 unit, and also they recognized the public safety officials on Sunday, this last Sunday. Members of the American Legion recognize the public safety commitment of our men and women who are doing police, fire, and EMS services here. So the service continues with these veterans. They don't stop, and it's a great place for them to go, not only for the camaraderie, but to still inculcate that sense of service to the community. It's still out there. And the other misnomer people have is maybe the American Legion is just for veterans, and it's not. If you had a service member in your family, whether it's a parent or a grandparent, you can still join the American Legion. You can still be a member as a son. You could be a member of the auxiliary if you have relatives who are in the service. We have a very profound riders group. These are motorcyclists who join the American Legion, and they do countless activities to benefit our community. So when you hear and you know, follow social media, follow these local posts in your community, whether it's the VFW, whether it's the American Legion, track them on their social media and see what they're doing. Seeing if they're doing their blood drive, seeing if they're doing, you know, for the holidays, we're doing a lot of food drives, you know, and it's a great place for veterans to go. And again, I have to go back to my original statement. It's not just a bar. It's not just a social club. It's a place where the sense of commitment to the community still resonates with these men and women. And, you know, I encourage everyone to look into these organizations and commit to helping them out. And certainly our veterans, you know, if you have veterans, some of them are maybe they're shy, they're apprehensive about going into these organizations. Great sense of community, great sense of camaraderie that's proliferated in these two types of groups.
You can tell that you and others still carry a service in your heart, and for that we are very, very thankful. And we want to thank you for joining us tonight. We'd also like to thank Brian Blausch from Barry Township for being the person to make this all happen behind the scenes, running the Zoom and the YouTube, and Lauren Turnbull from Hershey Entertainment and Resorts, who has been keeping an eye on the YouTube channel tonight and sending us the questions. To Amy, fun as always to be with you. Thank you for coming tonight. And most importantly, we want to say again, and this time even more from the heart, thank the three of you and all the veterans out there for your service. We appreciate all you've done for our country and everything that you've done tonight to just enlighten our community that much more about what it means to serve our nation and what our role is as a community member to support all of you and what you do. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you very much
Amy.
for recognizing us.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Tom.
You're all very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
And happy Veterans Day.
Roger that.
Good night, everyone.